The Manson Family Massacre, Night of Terror. Are you ready to hear a dark and true story? This shocking story shook Hollywood and the entire world. The narrative that follows is not a movie plot, but a brutal and true event that left deep scars on culture and social memory. It is the story of the murder of Sharon Tate, a promising young actress who was 8 months pregnant and who, along with her friends, had her life cruelly and brutally cut short by fanatical followers of a sinister cult, led by an extremely dangerous man with high psychopathy. This account reveals the disturbing details of a terrifying night, marked by violence and inhumanity. At every step of this story, we are reminded of how vulnerable we can be to manipulation and cruelty of people and the devastating impact that human beings can have when taken over by dark ideologies and blind obedience. Be careful who you surround yourself with and where you are being lured to hang out. Take a deep breath and be prepared, because what you are about to hear may shock you and stir your emotions. But before continuing with this shocking and true story, I ask that you subscribe to the channel and also click on the bell to be notified of each new video. Leave your comment, which is very important to us. Now let's watch the video. The murder of Sharon Tate is one of the most shocking crimes in Hollywood history. Sharon, a promising actress and wife of director Roman Polanski, was brutally murdered in the early hours of August 9, 1969, in her Los Angeles home, in a crime that shook the United States and generated widespread media attention. At the time, Sharon was 8.5 months pregnant. She lived in a house in the Benedict Canyon neighborhood of Los Angeles with Roman Polanski, who was out of the country working on a film in London. On that fateful night, Sharon received close friends: Jay Sebring, a well-known Hollywood hairdresser; Abigail Folger, heiress of the Folgers coffee brand; and Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail's boyfriend and a friend of Polanski. That morning, followers of Charles Manson, the leader of a cult known at the time as the Manson family, broke into the home of actress Sharon Tate. The group of invaders consisted of Charles Manson, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. Manson had instructed his group to leave a mark and to commit acts of violence that would create a climate of fear and racial unrest, a concept he called Helter Skelter, inspired by a distorted interpretation of the Beatles song. Once they entered the property, Tex Watson cut the power line to the house and the four of them went inside. The first victim was Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old who had visited the property's caretaker and was leaving the house. Tex Watson approached him, shot him and fatally shot him. The group then entered the house and gathered Sharon and her friends in the living room. The victims were tied up and brutally attacked. Jay Sebring tried to protect Sharon, begging them to spare his life because of her pregnancy, but was shot and stabbed multiple times. Abigail Folger managed to escape momentarily, but was chased into the garden and also stabbed to death. Wojciech Frykowski tried to fight back, but was brutally beaten, shot and stabbed to death. Now you can imagine the scene vividly in your minds. Sharon Tate was the last to be killed. In her last moments of life, she begged for the life of her 8-month-old baby, asking the attackers to spare the child. But Susan Atkins ignored her request and stabbed her several times, leading to the death of Sharon Tate and the baby she was carrying in her womb. After the murders, members of the Manson family used the victim's blood to write the word pig on the front door of the house, as a form of provocation and an attempt to create a distorted message to the public. They fled the scene and returned to the hideout where Manson was waiting for them. The crime was discovered by the housekeeper the next morning, when she saw the horrific scene and notified the police. The brutal murder of Sharon Tate and her friends shocked Hollywood and the world, leading to a manhunt that culminated in the arrest and conviction of those responsible, including Charles Manson, who was sentenced to life in prison. This murder marked history not only for its impact on popular culture, but also for the reflections it generated on security, the cult of personality and the dangers of cults. The impact of the murder of Sharon Tate and her friends was profound and lasting, echoing beyond the confines of Hollywood and the arts community. The case raised questions about security, the influence of manipulative leaders, and the dangerous dynamics that can emerge in cults and sections. The Manson family was made up of young people who had been drawn to Manson at a time of vulnerability, and gradually became completely dominated by his twisted ideas. During the trial, which began in 1970, the brutality of the crime and the cruelty of the killers were revealed in shocking detail. One of the most important witnesses was Linda Kasabian, who, although present at the crime scene, did not participate in the murders. Kasabian testified about Manson's influence and recounted the horrors of that night, providing essential testimony for the prosecution. She described how, before they left for their mission, Manson had instructed his followers to kill without mercy and leave a mark, an instruction that the cult members followed blindly. Susan Atkins, in particular, demonstrated a disturbing coldness. During the trial, she described in detail how she killed Sharon Tate and even revealed that, before stabbing her, she had told the actress, "I have no mercy for you." Atkins later confessed to other cult members that Sharon had begged for the life of her baby, but that she had cruelly ignored her. These statements shocked the public and reinforced the idea that the members of the Manson family had lost all humanity under Manson's influence. Charles Manson, although not directly at the scene of the crime, was considered the main mastermind and responsible for the murders. He manipulated his followers with a combination of charisma, psychological persuasion, and intimidation, convincing them that he was a prophet and that his orders must be carried out at any cost. During the trial, Manson behaved in a disturbing manner, making gestures, threats, and even carving a cross on his forehead as a way of provoking the authorities and reinforcing his position as a revolutionary leader. At times, he and his followers even sang songs and made bizarre statements, trying to demonstrate their loyalty to the leader and the purpose of the sect. In the end, Manson, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, who was implicated in other murders committed by the family, were sentenced to death. However, the sentence was commuted to life in prison after California abolished the death penalty in 1972. Manson spent the rest of his life in prison, where he continued to receive attention and even support from some followers and sympathizers over the decades. Despite this, the impact of his crimes and the suffering of the victims' families have never been erased. The deaths of Sharon Tate and her friends not only shook the entertainment world, but also marked the end of the era of innocence and optimism of the 1960s. The Hollywood community became much more secretive and cautious, with celebrities increasing security and taking measures to protect their homes and families. The fear and shock generated by the case fueled discussions about the risks of idealizing charismatic figures and the dangerous power dynamics that can arise within them. Of isolated groups such as the Manson cult. As time went on, Sharon Tate came to be remembered not only for the tragedy of her death, but also for her beauty, talent, and the potential her career could have achieved. Films, documentaries, and books have been created to explore and understand Manson's motives and the impact of the crime, helping to preserve the memory of Sharon and the other victims. The murder of Sharon Tate has become a sad reminder of the dangers of fanaticism and the influence of manipulative leaders. The story continues to serve as a warning against the destructive power of cults and the extremes to which some followers can go, driven by blind and irrational devotion. The story of Sharon Tate's murder is a devastating example of the impact of untreated mental illness, compounded by manipulative influences and psychopathic distortions. By observing the behavior of Charles Manson and his followers, we see how emotional fragility and psychological vulnerability can be exploited by charismatic and dangerous individuals. Manson, who displayed clear signs of mental illness, was a natural manipulator, using his distorted understanding of reality to construct a narrative of paranoia and anger that captivated and dominated his followers, many of whom were emotionally fragile and searching for direction. The Manson family was made up of young people in unstable situations, many of whom were struggling with feelings of rejection and existential emptiness. Charles Manson offered a false sense of belonging and purpose. But at what cost? For him, violence and chaos were tools of control, and he manipulated his followers into believing in an apocalyptic prophecy he called Helter Skelter. By exploiting their emotional and psychological vulnerabilities, Manson caused his followers to develop a blind and violent devotion, leading them to commit atrocities that, in themselves, reveal a total breakdown of empathy and moral sense. This case reminds us of how mental illnesses, if ignored, can be dangerous for both the individual and society. Psychopathies, personality disorders, and the lack of treatment for conditions such as chronic depression and anxiety can lead people to seek outlets in destructive influences, be they cults, addictions, or self-destructive and violent behaviors. When these vulnerable minds are exposed to manipulative leaders like Charles Manson, the risk of extreme acts, such as those we witnessed in the case of Sharon Tate, increases significantly. Today, we face a growing mental health crisis around the world, with illnesses such as depression, anxiety disorders, and other psychiatric conditions on the rise. Social pressure, economic hardship, loneliness, and unrealistic expectations of perfection can leave people feeling lost, sometimes unable to cope with their own emotions. The tragic story of Sharon Tate and her friends serves as a wake-up call to the importance of mental health care and the urgency of seeking help for emotional disorders. The tragedy of actress Sharon Tate was not only an act of extreme violence, but also the product of a profound breakdown in values and mental health. It is a reminder that psychological disorders can lead to terrible consequences when left untreated, and that we need to be compassionate, not only to the victims, but also to the people who, often without support, face emotional challenges that leave them vulnerable. May the memory of this case inspire us to pay more attention to our own emotional fragility and that of those around us, promoting a society that seeks more understanding, support, and treatment for all who suffer. Be sure to comment on this shocking case.